With the new census data that came out 2022, 2023, some of our attention is turning to updating our comprehensive plan. And that's really important for us because we are a community that has generally been resistant to zoning. And now we are seeing issues that are normally addressed through land use and planning, but that my board or the public might not necessarily want to do. So the advice that we've been given is to create a very strong comprehensive plan that points to particular issues that we could legislate on based on our comprehensive plan, as opposed to pursuing comprehensive zoning, which would also take a long time. So we're just digging into that to see what kind of approach we want to take. And again, my board's traditionally pretty conservative financially, so we don't want to spend a ton of money on that. But just in the past couple of years, we really cracked the code in terms of starting to get grant funding flowing to Lodi. So, I'm pushing for, a comprehensive plan that would set us up for many more hundreds of thousands of dollars to come into the town and actually get started on revitalization.
What are some of the things you talk about? Obviously, a pretty financially conservative community, a board as well in that regard. What do you guys hear month to month as being like kind of the bigger concerns for people who live in Lodi?
It's interesting because our community is sort of three different communities. We've got the lakeside, we've got the economic corridor on 414, the wineries and whatnot. And then we got the folks up in the hills that is really just mostly a residential community. So Lakeside, we're still dealing with a number of issues related to the 2018 flood, culverts and bridges, and you fix one thing and another thing pops up. We've been trying to thread the needle on how to get additional support. We've got a lot of financial support from FEMA and the State Department of Homeland Security from the 2018 flood. But then they didn't cover some sort of secondary or tertiary problems that our taxpayers are having to cover now, such as culverts that weren't covered under the project. So we're trying to navigate that, which is difficult. And this is multi-million-dollar projects in Lodi, which we're not also familiar with or used to. So that's where most of our focus is, down at the lake, and then trying to figure out what the next 10 to 15 years look like with streams and erosion and things like that, because the flood is still, we're still seeing a lot of erosion and sediment buildup down there, which causes further floods and damage. The village or the economic corridor, that's still developing. That's happening quickly. I'm seeing lots of properties get purchased. We're starting to see more solar developments pop up, which, I'm sort of like all for people doing whatever they want with their land. But when we're talking about that economic corridor, we need to ask the question of, is that where we want solar development, or do we want more commercial development so that way we can increase our tax base and sales tax and whatnot? But again, with a town without planning or zoning, we don't get to make those decisions. Those things are sort of bubbling up. The village, I've got high hopes for the village, obviously, coming to being a town supervisor from being a village mayor, but I'm seeing them begin to take the right steps. Their budget is laughable. I mean, it's like $47,000 or $50,000 a year. So, and I know this, but practically there's nothing you can do with that.
Right.
You want to go out for a grant, you have a local match. If that local match is $5,000, that's 10% of your budget. It's not doable. But they're taking the right steps. They're doing income surveys. They're positioning themselves to get set up for grants and for zero interest loans. But they're going to need a comprehensive plan as well to root those applications in. And then up on the hills, we're dealing with the same old stuff that we deal with all the time, which is roads, ditches, streams, culverts, and just making sure folks are, and broadband, which has been a big issue for us lately. So making sure that they have the base sort of infrastructure that they need to be happy without, running over them with planning and land use, because I'm very sensitive to that.
How does that planning, I'm curious, how does the planning standpoint, how do you go through the planning process, understanding that there is a village in the center of Lodi, the town? Does there have to be kind of this networking, this back and forth? Do each have to be involved in the other in order for it to work?
Yes and no. I think the village is much more capable of driving that conversation within the 5 to 6 blocks that the village entails, because they have a lot more impact that they can do working from that level. The town, our impact on the village is mostly roads. We sort of take care of the roads for the village. So yeah, there should be a conversation there, but frankly, the town's role should really be more in the economic corridor, or if the village does choose to ultimately pursue public water, which all signs point to that's what they need, maybe the town could facilitate that conversation with a neighboring town or village.
I'm curious what you think, and this is broad, this is kind of big picture. If small towns and villages have to spend all of their resources and most of their time, frankly, trying to navigate these very basic issues, roads, culverts, things like that, how can the bigger problems, um, population, building that tax base, economic development, how can those bigger picture issues get tackled appropriately? It seems like you guys would
Uh,
need significant reinforcements.
Yeah, so it's the chicken and the egg. We do this all the time. Does economic development come first? Does a business put an anchor down and folks follow by moving to Lodi, or do folks move to Lodi because of low property values and then therefore inform the economic development? Or are you left with the third option, which is nobody's paying attention, nobody's coming to town, and everything's staying sort of stagnant. And that's where I think these state programs, a village like Lodi is not dreaming of winning the downtown revitalization initiative for $10 million. Even though initially that's like, got our hopes up.
Why not?
But the Forward New York or the New York Forward seems a little bit more appropriate. But I think you can already see that the initial award winners there are even larger villages. So Lodi is a village of 250 people, while Montour Falls is in the thousands, or Watkins Glen is in 2,000.
Yeah.
And Waterloo and Seneca Falls up towards 5,000 or 6,000. So to us, it feels like our little villages, Lodi, Ovid, Interlaken, get left behind because we are so small. And the state has sort of pivoted to saying, maybe you should just dissolve. So they've put some financial incentives in there for towns. I don't know if you know this, but when a village dissolves, generally the larger municipality that absorbs the village will receive something like 10 or 15% of their own revenue annually for X number of years. So as a town, we are financially incentivized to want the village to dissolve. And me, as a village resident, I want the village to stay in shape. I want them to drive the conversation and focus on the village. Because I'm thinking, if the village dissolves, how many village members will you have on the town board? One, if you're lucky. So nobody will be guiding how the village develops, or really paying attention to it. Or you might just have a 4-to-1 vote, and this is an old school thing where townsfolk think they're paying for the village already. And so still having the village in good shape really helps to drive that forward. The ultimate answer is, I don't know, Josh. We need private investment and we need folks to see Lodi as a place to come. But without a shot in the arm to give the village government or the town government the resources that we need to spark interest, then I think we're in a little bit of trouble. And I don't want to run on and on, but like the ARPA funds were a godsend. So we're going to probably use the ARPA funds to tear down abandoned buildings, to tear down our old town hall, to make our streets safer. That promotes public health and ultimately puts these lots back on the tax rolls for development, parks, or whatever they may be. Lodi only got the town only got 125,000 in ARPA funds, which is not a lot, but that's enough for us to tackle 2 or 3 projects, or even leverage that into more grant funds. So we've got a grant application out under Restore New York to tear down our town hall. So we'll see if we'll be able to leverage that. But that's the exact kind of shot in the arm that we need. And remind me to talk about county sales tax sharing at some point in this conversation.
We'll get there. Don't worry. You mentioned Montour Falls, and yes, that is a larger village by comparison to the village of Lodi. So I'm curious, even as a small, Lodi, a smaller, more rural town, um, do do you feel like there's a path forward for these smaller communities in a lot of these state programs, or do you think it would be better if the state kind of created a lane that was dedicated to these smaller communities if they really wanted to tackle the problem and see, a solution?
Yes, both. I'll start with the second part of that, which is so the state started with the DRI at 10 million. Now they're looking at New York Forward with 1 or 2 million. Why don't we look at the third level of that at 100 or 200,000? Because again, with a budget of 50,000, $100,000
It's
to the village
huge.
of Lodi is
It's
life
huge.
changing. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and with awards of 100 or 200,000, you're talking about very minimal impacts to the state budget. I think there's something like 900 villages. I might be wrong on that number. Um, but that's not a lot of money over, say, the course of 5 or 10 years, as opposed to the DRI or the New York Forward or Restore New York. So I think that would be a nice start with smaller amounts. The first question, the way forward, the village is being okay. So the village of Montour Falls, like their budget's over $1 million. They've got millions of dollars in fund balance. Again, that's not the case in the smaller villages. So what do they need? They need support on planning. Ultimately, if there's no comprehensive plan, then there's nothing to root a grant application in, and you have no vision. So we need to be able to encourage smaller villages to be able to have comprehensive plans done by professionals that spell out a clear vision for a decade or two so that they can base all of those grant applications in. And I'm sure there seems to be many financial opportunities for planning grants and whatnot, but again, you come back to local matches that they can't afford, and they get stuck in these positions. Also, small villages have a tough time keeping an active, engaged board. So you really do need the professionals to come in and drive the conversation. I just saw something recently, and I'm trying to remember which program it was, but it did provide for free planning services from the state. And I'm thinking it was a utility program or part of this new housing push that the governor's making to give free planning services to smaller municipalities. So I need to do a little bit more research into that. But it sounds like they're starting to think about it.
I was going to say, as a follow up to that, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the things that go into this kind of grant planning, a comp plan is essentially necessary, right? Like, in order to be taken seriously in any of these state grants, whether it's New York Forward or any of them, big or small, you need a comp plan, right?
Yeah, my understanding is that you essentially get denied outside of emergency situations for grants if you don't have a comp plan. You have nothing to root your application in. It looks like you're just picking something out of a hat, and the state's not really willing to fund that because they want to see the economic impact over multiple projects, not just one, tearing down one house or something like that.
Right. That is a little curious then, just given the fact that it's almost as if at that point the state's turning a blind eye to a lot of these small communities, or just saying you have no other choice but to dissolve. Because without a comp plan, and I'm sure, there are a number of small villages around the state that don't have a comp plan or an up-to-date comp plan. It's like, if they can't even participate, what is this?
And so the town of Lodi has a comp plan that was last updated in 2013. I think comp plans should be updated every year or every other year. But again, in the towns with this mindset, our comp plan is half of a comp plan. To me, the first half of a comp plan is your demographics and your history and your geography, and you're setting the stage for what you have, what assets you have. And the second half of your comp plan is your vision. The town of Lodi has the first half of the comp plan because we didn't seek professional services to do it. So our planning board 10 years ago hashed out that first half, pulled the census data, put it all in line, put the maps together, and then there's one page of recommendations which are ultimately vague. The town of Lodi should support economic development in any way possible. There's no actual vision of what we should be doing. So you really do got to bring the professionals in, and unfortunately, they are costly. But they do a good job and they get it. So you need a comp plan, and you need one that has a vision, not just, I don't want to cuss, but not just halfway there.
Yeah, I can get that. All right, let's talk about it. Sales tax sharing. I haven't covered the Seneca County Board of Supervisors now in 3 or 4 years, but I remember sitting through a good share of meetings between 2013 and 2017, 2018, and it came up frequently. What is, for those who aren't engaged in this particular storyline in local politics. What are we looking for, and what is the goal, and how optimistic are you that this time it's going to get across the finish line?
Yeah, I'm hesitant to share details because I feel pretty close to the finish line. So this was one of my three goals when I ran for supervisor. The first was to complete our town hall. The second was to stop an oversized build of a consolidated sewer treatment plant that would have jacked up Lodi sewer users' prices by three times, from 300 to 900 a year. And the third was to find a new revenue stream for the town, especially for the villages in the south end, and that's through sharing sales tax. Um, we are so lucky that we have this tourism industry, and we're lucky that the north end of the county has such a robust automotive sales industry, and that's really what drives our sales tax here in Seneca County. And it's really, really healthy. Even through the COVID pandemic, wineries succeeded really well. So we saw sales tax actually increase drastically over the state numbers. So we take in now over $30 million a year at the county in sales tax. It's one of our biggest revenues. Compare that to the actual tax levy of the county. The county charges taxpayers about $10 million a year in revenues. So we get $30 million from sales tax. And we feel in Lodi and in Ovid and well, I won't speak for any other supervisors, but we feel like we're taking a lot of the brunt in terms of the amount of tourists that are coming. And especially with Airbnbs down private roads and local roads, we're really getting torn up on infrastructure. And then to add to that, like all these little seasonal cottages that used to be family owned, still are family owned, family come for the weekend, are now seeing parties of 10 or 12 people, which affects septic systems and wells and just infrastructure in general. So I could go on and on. So I wanted to make a reasonable proposal to share sales tax. We're one of, I think, counties out of I always forget this number, 65 in the state or something like that, that don't share sales tax. And I recognize that asking for a large portion would significantly affect the county budget and jack the tax rates up. And I don't want to do that. So the sweet spot that I found is to ask the county to share just 10% of the sales tax. So that's about 3 million of the 30 million that we take in. And when you look at the whole county budget, that amount can essentially be absorbed and negated through line item savings and ultimately the amount that you don't spend throughout the year. We would not affect the overall tax rate. That's up for argument, and I think a lot of guys would argue against me on that. But from what I see, I think we can do it. So that 3 million split up between 10 towns and 4 villages, I think would have an enormous impact. If you can absorb it county level, you're essentially adding $3 million in services to county residents. And that for Seneca County is an enormous amount. So like under my proposal, the town of Lodi would get something between like $100,000 and $150,000 additional a year. Our budget's about $1 million. So that 10 to 15% increase would allow us to do another mile or two of roads a year paved. That sounds so insignificant, but when you've got 40 miles of road and the calculations that we make, if we were to maintain all of our roads with the budget that we have, it would take us something like 85 years to maintain all of our roads on a regular basis. And we can't do that because we only have like 5-year cycles. So anyway, it would have a big impact. And then for the villages, again, like the village of Lodi with a $50,000 budget, would get somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 under this. So to increase your budget by 50% would really allow you to serve residents and then maybe put some money back into the community and start to have a little spark of economic development. And if you do that throughout the entire South End, you're talking about an extra $1 million or so coming in. I think we could position ourselves really well, especially if we work together.
And the idea being, at least taking a bit of a historian's view on it, is that the county has struggled with bridging that gap between North and South Seneca, correct? Essentially, that's really what we're talking about here over the long haul.
I think so, but like I don't want to blame anybody because the linear nature of our county, where the south end gets stuck in between the lakes, where there's no lateral movements, no highways, I get it. You don't want necessarily to invest in infrastructure there, while the north end with Waterloo and Seneca Falls has 10,000 people, and it's set up for economic development. So I don't think anybody was wrong in taking that approach. But I think we need to wake up to see how much tourism we have down here, how much lodging we have down here now, how much we're generating in room tax, and just give us a little investment to try to improve that because it's already good. But if we can fix it up a little bit better, our folks can charge more for their rooms. Our wineries will get more business. We can build upon sales tax, and the North End will benefit too. Yeah.